Okay, in the last video we looked at the formants of English vowels and at the difference between voiced and voiceless stops. In this video we'll go through the rest of consonant manner and then we'll also look in a little bit more detail at stops in different positions in English. So I'm going to start again by going to my Praat objects window and finding my sound files. I'm already in the right directory because I just opened these. I'm going to take all these files. And we were looking at the consonant manner ones. I'm going to select that, press View and Edit to get into the analysis window here. I'm going to resize this just to make it a little bit more manageable. Is that good in the center of the screen? It's good, okay. And so what we looked at, the first part was ata and ada.
Ata, ada.
Here are some fricatives.
Asa, aza.
So a voiceless fricative and a voiced one. I'm going to select this interval and then press the SEL button to zoom in. And again, I can leave the formants on or take them off. For this one, we're going to be not so interested in the formants, so I'll probably just get rid of that. And so again, we have a schwa vowel here, a little short schwa vowel, and then a much longer second vowel here, a stressed one. And in between the two vowels, you can see here that the energy around F1 and F2 in the spectrogram pretty much dies out entirely, whereas over here it doesn't, right? And that's because this one is voiced and this one is voiceless. And if we zoom in closer, you can see this in a bit more detail. So this is just going to be up to the very beginning of the second vowel.
Asa, asa, asa.
Let's see what this looks like. So again, we have this little tiny short schwa here. And then when the frication takes over, it's just this big black mess. Right? And that's very typical of a strident or a sibilant fricative like s. It's the loudest obstruent sound. And it has this very strong noise component. Now, this is not so easy to see in the spectrogram. And the reason why is because most of the energy in this frication noise, here's what it sounds like, is actually above 5,000 hertz. So if you want to see how loud this is, you need to change the spectrogram settings to see a larger range of frequencies. So I'm going to double this to 10,000. Oh, and now all of a sudden we see there's this huge amount of acoustic energy, you know, in the like 5,000 to 7,000 hertz range, which is, that frequency range is not so relevant to most speech sounds, but sibilant fricatives, it really is relevant. That said, I'm going to zoom back away from this because I want to be able to see the lower frequencies a little better, so I'm going to change these back to the standards. If you ever get lost and can't remember what the right values are, you hit standards. That'll give you the Praat default settings. Right? So here's what a default spectrogram looks like. Yeah. So that's the voiceless one. I'm going to keep scrolling right. Here's the voiced one. And you can see here, there's still a fair bit of noise over here, but it's much less loud for this voiced fricative than it is for the voiceless one, and that's typical. That's generally a property of voiced versus voiceless obstruents. The voiced obstruents tend to have a much quieter noise component. And you can clearly hear the voicing in there. You can see that the voicing is still going underneath all the noise. And you can see it in the spectrogram. We still get these individual vertical striations showing voicing, even though there's also lots of noise up here. So voiced fricatives have a voicing source and they have a noise source that are going at the same time. Other thing to notice as we're going up this scale, this is sometimes called the sonority scale. So it goes from least vowel-like to most vowel-like, is that in general, the sounds in the middle of the two vowels are getting darker, right? And they're getting more vowel-like. They're just louder and have more energy as we go up this scale. So this is going to be a za, I think.
Ana.
Oh, sorry, that's the nasal. My bad. And you can see this nasal is very vowel-like, right? There's maybe a little tiny dip in amplitude here between the unstressed schwa and the nasal consonant, but not much. And if you look in the spectrogram, there's very dark here with clear formant structure. And that's very typical of sonorant consonants. They tend to have clear formant structure, just like vowels, but maybe be not quite as loud. Now, nasality itself is extremely hard to see in a spectrogram. It's not clear exactly what you'd be looking for. And so it's also very hard to measure in a spectrogram. So we're not going to get into that in this class. You will notice there's a slight shift in what the formants look like inside this nasal. So the nasal is roughly here in the sound.
Na.
Right. One of the things you can see here is a weakening of the second formant inside this nasal. And there's a good systematic reason for that, although it's super complicated. But definitely one of the things to look for in the nasal is a sort of weakening or smearing out of some of the lower formants. Could be F1, could be F2, could be both. It depends on the speaker and the vowel. But other than that, fairly vowel-like, fairly loud, just like the surrounding vowels, and very much unlike a stop or something like that. And as we keep going up the sonority scale to a liquid now,
Allah. Allah.
Here it's getting hard to even distinguish the liquid sound from its surroundings. So I think this is probably the schwa. This part is probably the most of the lateral. And then this is the stressed vowel. Still, stressed vowel is much louder than any of these other sounds. But here, very little dip in intensity between the first and the second vowel. L is a very sonorous, very vowel-like consonant, and you can see that the formants clearly continue all the way through that lateral sound. The third formant here maybe weakens a little bit, and that has to do with the dynamics of laminal flow, of the air flowing around your tongue tip. It does some funny things to the resonances in the spectrum, but again, what you're mainly seeing here and the main takeaway is just that, look, liquids are very sonorous consonants and they're a lot like vowels. This is R. How do I know that? Well, the main signature of the English sound is this diving third formant. Right? This third formant gets incredibly low during an sound. And that's the defining characteristic of the American English
Ara, ara, ara.
So I would say, there's sort of a clean transition here, a steady transition from the schwa into the and then back up to a stressed vowel here. But again, this is a pretty vowel-like sound. It's very sonorous or sonorant, and it has clear formant structure and is not much quieter than the unstressed vowel schwa here. Finally, the most vowel-like consonants, the glides. This is aya.
Aya, aya, aya.
And it's very hard to even see anything that looks like a consonant in here. This looks like a single vowel, and that's because a glide really is a lot like a vowel. In particular, I can see the second formant rising here. That tells me that it's going to be a high front kind of a vocoid, and ya is the consonant version of the high front vowel e. So if we just isolate this, let's see what it sounds like. Sounds a lot like the vowel E. And so this is just illustrating again, with a glide, it's not even going to be clear where the consonant begins and the vowel ends. This is a very vowel-like consonant. So this is how consonant manner works. I would probably lighten this spectrogram a bit, just because it looks very dark to me. You can see a little bit better here, maybe. Yeah, you could get a slightly clearer formant definition here now. But still, there's nothing in here that obviously says vowel, consonant, vowel. This consonant is very vowel-like. Okay, last illustration of American English sounds. American English stops are extremely complicated. And in this file, what I'm doing is taking all the American English stops and putting them in different positions with regard to vowels and stress. And this radically changes what they sound like. So this comes in series of 3. Here's the first one.
Appease, puppies, up.
Okay, so what's going on here? In the first one, I have a stop in front of a stressed vowel, voiceless stop here. In the second one, I have it after a stressed vowel before an unstressed vowel. And in the third one here, I have it at the end of a phrase or of a word. So what does this sound like?
Appease.
If we look in here, we get this little tiny schwa vowel, and then just as we saw earlier, a nice burst here followed by aspiration. That's what that sounds like. If we zoom in, we'll probably be able to see the burst a little bit more clearly. This vertical striation in the spectrogram is the actual burst where my two lips are opening, and there's a sudden change in pressure. Here's what this sounds like. All right, that sounds like a wood block or something. You wouldn't associate that with speech normally. Then there's all this aspiration noise, and then the vowel starts. So that's appease. I'm going to scroll over. The next one is puppies. And that first puh sound will probably be a lot like the one we just saw, but we're interested now in the second puh sound. So it should be somewhere in here.
Puppy, puppy, puppy.
So what's going on here? Again, we get not quite silence, but almost silence during the closure. We have this nice sharp burst here. This is going to be the burst of the puh. But no aspiration. It goes straight into the next vowel. I'm going to move the window over a little bit because it resizes to the loudest thing in the window. And right now, that's the end of the stressed vowel. I want to focus in on the stuff after the stressed vowel. So I'm just going to move the window over a tiny bit. Yeah, we get a slightly clearer view here. This spectrogram looks really dark to me, so I'm going to lighten it again. I'm going to experiment with a couple lighter settings. Here's 40. Looks a little bit better. Maybe I'll keep that. Okay. And again, you can see the burst here followed immediately by vowel. There's very little or no aspiration, and that's typical of this position in English. How about at the end of a word? Well, here is, I think this is pup over here.
Up.
Or up.
Up.
Right? And you can see here, this is the vowel. It tails off into silence. And then just over here at the very end, there's this very, very weak, almost not even there noise. And that is a very quiet consonant release. So at the ends of words or the ends of phrases in English, these consonants can be not audibly released at all. And even when they are released, it can be very, very quiet. And yeah, you can barely see this in the spectrogram. So this is up.
Up. Up.
Right? Very quiet release. So these are all the same category of English, right? They're all voiceless labial stops, but they look radically different depending on where they occur with regard to other sounds and with regard to stress. And that's what I'm trying to illustrate here in American English. We get a lot of variability in our stop system. So those were voiceless labial ones. What are the next ones here?
Rebel.
Okay, so this one's going to be the voiced ones, and here with rebel, you can see, I'm going to zoom in on the aba part of it.
Rebel. Rebel.
Again, there's closure following the schwa. This is the schwa. This is the closure, but here there's voicing going during the closure, so you get this voice bar. And then there's a burst here at the end, but it's followed almost immediately by vowel. So no aspiration here. Not as much noise as you get in a voiceless stop either. And that's, again, typical. Voiceless obstruents have a lot more noise in them than voiced ones do. So that's before a stressed vowel. Here's before an unstressed vowel.
Rubble.
And here, I just zoomed way in on the ebble part.
Bubble. 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 Bubble.
Zero crossings there. And here, you can barely even see the stop.
Bubble. Bubble.
I guess it gets a lot quieter in here. There's some voicing going on. There's a sort of weak burst here, I think. And then it goes straight into the vowel. And this is just a much less stop-like stop than we saw before stress position. And that, again, is typical in American English. Before in between two vowels where the second one is unstressed, you sometimes get a weakening of obstruents and really every other consonant. in American English and in many other languages as well. So that's sort of a weak voice stop. And then here's word final.
Rub, rub, rub.
So again, we have this single vowel. It ramps down into near silence. Maybe the voicing actually dies out entirely. And then there's this release, which looks like a voiced release. Yeah, and so that's, again, looking very different than the other context that we saw voice stop in. And so the rest of these are just showing you that the same thing is true for other places of articulation.
Deter, deter.
So again, strong burst here, lots of aspiration following it. That's before a stressed vowel.
Deader.
Here, because the coronal stops in English do tapping or flapping in this intervocalic context, you can not even see a stop here. A tap or a flap is going to show up as like a very short, momentary lightening of the spectrogram. Here's what it sounds like. Right? So you can hear that's extremely short. It's not a real stop, even though American English speakers are sort of trained to hear this as a stop. In phonetic terms, it's a tap or a flap. It's closer to a sonorant, and it doesn't look at all like a stop in the spectrogram or in the waveform. And here's word final.
Dead.
It's pretty strong release on this word final one for the final coronal stop. Here we go with the voiced ones. Ooh, excuse me.
Medallion, medallion.
So again, there's voicing during the closure here. You get this nice sharp burst, and then almost immediately a vowel, so no aspiration there.
Metal.
And again, just like the voiceless coronal stop, the voiced coronal stop becomes a tap here. And this one, you can see it sort of lightens up a little bit. There's like a very, very short cessation of energy, but it's not a real stop. There you go. That's a tapped stop in English. And here's final.
Mud.
Mud. And you can see this nice release here with a little bit of voicing around it. Oh, or maybe there's no voicing there. Maybe it's partially devoiced. Here are the velar stops.
Recall.
You can see this nice big burst from the k, followed by lots and lots of aspiration. That's before a stressed vowel. Before a stressless vowel, you still get the nice sharp burst, but there's no aspiration here.
Buckle, buckle.
Interesting. And then word finally here.
Buck.
This actually is the strongest release we've seen yet, and there's a good reason for this. The end of this vowel, you can see the voicing periods here getting somewhat irregular, and that means that I have some glottal constriction going on. Again, this is very common in the final syllable or final few syllables of a phrase in English. So here's what the glottalized vowel sounds like. And with that glottal constriction and the velar constriction at the same time, what I'm going to get here is almost an ejective stop. So we sort of started out like talking about differences between languages in this class by saying English doesn't have ejective stops. But actually, if you look long enough at real speech, you'll find just about anything happens sometimes. And indeed, final voiceless stops in American English are sometimes more ejective than they are normal stops. So here's what this sounds like. It's a pretty strong release burst, and it's probably coupled with glottalization. I would say this is a pseudo-ejective stop release. We have here.
Begin.
So this is before a stressed vowel. Again, nice sharp burst, this vertical stripe. That's the burst of the velar. No aspiration, so to speak of. And you can pretty clearly see voicing continuing throughout the closure here. Here it is before an unstressed vowel.
Buggin', buggin'.
Much less clear stop character here, right? So it doesn't get as quiet. The burst is not as sharp. And this, again, is typical where you get weakening of a lot of obstruent consonants. It's called lenition in phonology. In this particular context in American English, in between two vowels, the second of which is unstressed. That's where you get tapping of the coronal stops, and you also get weakening of the other stops, but just not to the same extent. And here's the final G.
Bug. Bug.
Right, so pretty weak burst at the end here. So in general, what we're seeing is that these consonants are sort of strongest and most consonantal before a stressed vowel, that they tend to show weakening when they're in between two vowels where the second one is unstressed. And then finally, we're getting a really weird mix of different kinds of properties, some of which involve glottalization, often very weak bursts. And this is completely typical of American stops, American English stops. So what part of the lesson here is just that talking about what are the phonetics of an American English stop. Well, really, there's several different sets of different phonetic properties that hold in different positions in the language. So there's really a lot of complexity in the American English stop system.